So welcome to everybody. Well, I believe that there could be no better way to end a super salone than to invite a super architect. Credo che non ci sia un modo migliore per concludere questa giornata del super salone che avere con noi un super architetto. Bjarke is a friend, someone that I'm following since a long time. I always loved his visionary way to let's change the world through architecture. And we are so happy to have him here today. Well, it has only just begun because Bjarke has so many things that he's doing in Italy and in Milan in particular. And I'm also so happy to announce that he will promote an exhibition at Triennale Milano 2023. And thank you, Bjarke, for being with us. Grazie mille a tutti, Bjarke Ingels.
Thank you, Stefano. So obviously we're here at Salone, and I'm very happy to be back. We were supposed to be here last year, and that didn't happen. But maybe just I'm actually not going to be talking about product design, but I will mention that. Here in Milano, we've had like a very long and good sort of collaboration with Carlotta and the team from Artemide. That you can also see some of the things on display here, and I think it's a sort of the collaboration. You know, we always use the term collaboration, but sometimes it's really more collaboration than others. And I think in the case of the work with Artemide, it's really truly. My team and Carlotta's team that together have been sort of continuing this conversation that started at a Salone some years ago, and here you can see some of the latest products that we've developed together. But what I really wanted to talk about is actually maybe this sort of greater power of design. And the Danish word for design is formgivning, which literally means to give form to that which has not yet been given form. So in other words, to give form to the future. And more specifically, it means that as designers and as human beings, we have the power to give form to the world that we would like to find ourselves living in the future. And for my own sake, and you know, as the world is changing, there's constantly new challenges and new opportunities that we have to give form to. The first project we ever did was the Copenhagen Harbour bath that extends the life of the city into the water. The water had become so clean that you could swim in it. We also recently opened the Harbour bath in Aarhus. And in Aarhus, it's the second city of Denmark. It's maybe the Milano of Denmark. And we got this idea to, when you do waterfront developments, because in a way the money is in the condos, so often you end up putting these like condos in front of the water, but you somehow forget the life around the buildings. So we decided to take all the functions that create life, including the harbor bath, a floating beach, a theater for children, and then we sort of we put them there first, and then all the buildings somehow have to subordinate themselves to the demands of the public space. So we also then started building the building the furthest away. So you have this kind of string of pearls. You can see the children's theater, and you can see these little bathhouses in the foreground. It's a kind of new experimental typology of very small, 26 square meter little huts that sit along the water. They somehow break down the scale of the waterfront. And if you own one of these, you are obliged to make a public activity 4 times a year. So it creates this kind of strange miniature village along the industrial waterfront. We actually own one of them. So if you ever come to Aarhus, you should Airbnb this one. it's a very nice place to live in the city, and you have this kind of very interesting interaction with the life on the waterfront. And then next to the harbor bath, we are also building a hotel that in a way extends this waterfront promenade up towards the sky. So the promenade sort of takes you up to a raised square. The hotel has a thermal bath with hot springs, sort of overlooking the city, and you can literally walk along terraces all the way to the top. So it becomes this kind of extension from, trying to in a way like find new places for the public life of the city in as many sort of locations as possible. The harbor bath sort of gave us this idea like 20 years ago. It was the first project we did. It made us realize that because the port was clean in Copenhagen, the idea of a clean port or sort of a sustainable city was not only good for the environment, it was also amazing for the people living in that city. And we thought maybe there's like a general recipe that maybe hedonistic sustainability is a concept that means that sustainable cities and sustainable buildings are not only better for the environment, they're also better for the lives of the people inhabiting them. And we've been sort of pursuing this idea ever since. And 2 years ago, we opened this building you see in Copenhagen. It's a waste to energy power plant that turns the waste of Copenhagen into district heating and electricity. It's so clean that there are no toxins coming out of the chimney. So the facade is conceived as a giant climbing wall. If you are a very good climber, you can climb the tallest climbing wall in the world. It's definitely a few levels above my skill level as a climber. But it basically becomes this kind of building that is an invitation. Like normally a power plant would have fences around it. Here you are invited to climb the facade. You can take the elevator up inside the belly of the power plant. So it's washed with daylight. And then on the roof, it has this man-made alpine ski park because we don't really have reliable snow in Denmark. It's full of indigenous. If Denmark had mountains, this is what they would look like. And then we've been working with an Italian company called Neveplast that basically creates this skiable surface that you can ski on all year. Normally we would have to go to the Alps, but now because of clean technology, the Copenhageners can actually ski on the roof of the power plants that turn the trash into power and district heating. So I see this as the sort of ultimate manifestation of hedonistic sustainability, that it really sort of that sustainable technology actually not only is better for the environment, it really is better for the lives of the people that enjoy it. And in that sense, it opens up a sort of a myriad of new possibilities for us designers to think about. And another thing that has been sort of going through our work and that I'll speak about today is the idea of the oxymoron. And an oxymoron is a concept that combines two things that seem mutually exclusive, like hedonistic sustainability or a power plant that is also a public park and a ski slope. And I think in all of our best work, we manage to somehow explore combining things in unexpected ways. Also, right before the pandemic, we opened this museum in a sculpture park in Norway. And the museum is actually a bridge that spans from one side of the sculpture park to the other. It's a vertical and a horizontal gallery that turn in the middle. And it also gives the building this kind of sculptural quality that it looks like one of the larger sculptures in the sculpture park. So it is essentially a museum that is also a bridge and that is also a sculpture in its own right. It's actually made out of standard 2x4s, painted white. So even though the eye sees curves and sort of warped surfaces, everything is made out of completely standardized Norwegian timber. So you can say, in some way, trying to create something extraordinary out of really ordinary ingredients. And another sort of oxymoron is one of the favorite words or word pairs of one of my favorite companies. Systematic creativity is how Lego describes what they offer children. And we've had this kind of pleasure of working together with the Lego company on trying to imagine the house or the home of the brick. This is one of my favorite photos. It's me and all of the richest people in Denmark, because the richest people in Denmark are the guys that make Lego. This was the architectural model. For your information, a Lego man is 1 to 50. And this was the build result. And what we tried to do was to imagine an architecture that was as inviting and as engaging and as interactive as Lego is itself. So the entire roof is a series of public playgrounds that are sort of open for the citizens of Billund to sort of climb and explore. The building is open in all 4 corners, so you have a square. And the exhibition spaces are pulled apart to allow daylight and views to seep in between them, so you can actually roam around without a ticket. And then, of course, once you sort of immerse yourself in the exhibitions, it may also be one of the few museums in the world where you have to touch all the artifacts. What's interesting about Lego is that it's not a toy, it's a tool that empowers the child to create his or her own world, and then to inhabit that world through play, and to invite her friends to join her in co-creating and cohabiting that world. So I think in many ways it somehow is incredibly aligned with what I believe is the true power of form giving. Sort of inspired by this kind of systematic approach of Lego, we designed a affordable housing in Copenhagen based on taking these prefabricated modules, and rather than stacking them densely, we sort of pulled them apart. So we only place every second unit. So you can see we don't end up doubling neither floors or walls. The in-between space becomes slightly higher, so you have 2.5 meter ceilings in general, and then you have 3.5 meter ceilings in the main spaces. So you have almost these sort of very grand proportions. It's affordable housing, so everything has been made as inexpensive as we could. The guardrail is actually a standard construction site fence. And as architects, you've probably climbed over a construction site fence once in a while. So you know that they're very light and actually quite elegant, and the cheapest thing you can buy for money. So in that sense, you can say the kind of aesthetic, the aesthetic of making it inexpensive, because it's affordable housing, like there was zero money to play with, ends up creating this kind of strange generosity, the extra ceiling heights that comes from the modular system, the exposed concrete ceilings, and the sort of the timber cladding. Also, we've been spending the last decade trying to sort of reimagine housing in various ways, and just a few examples. The 8 house that we finished 10 years ago sort of expands the public realm into the vertical dimensions. You can walk and bicycle up to the penthouse, creating this kind of man-made village. In Amsterdam, we are just finishing a building called the Sluishuis, which is a city block that opens up so you can actually sail your sailing boat into the courtyard, and sort of suddenly makes the courtyard part of the bigger sort of port space of Holland. And in New York, we try to combine the communal space of the European courtyard with the sort of density and verticality of the American skyscraper to create this kind of new sort of US European hybrid of the cord scraper, but essentially placing a little oasis in the middle of the city. So I think maybe all three projects are like sort of examples of this kind of oxymoronic approach, where you try to take things that you would normally not find together and see what happens when you actually put them together, and see if an interesting and new direction sort of offers itself. We've also spent the last 6 years trying to sort of imagine the future workspace of Google. And basically, when we started the work, Google allowed us to sort of understand the architecture of their organization, that they're sort of organized in studios that bundle into neighborhoods of 150 people. And in the first building, they wanted 3,000 people working on a single sort of contiguous landscape. And what typically happens is that then you have all the support functions, meeting rooms, technical rooms, labs, that sort of clutter the floor plate and break up the continuity. So we came up with this idea of imagining sort of 20 platforms of 150 people. Each platform is connected to its neighboring platforms. The ones in the middle are, each platform is the height of a desk higher than its neighbor. So even if you're in the middle, you can actually look out in all directions. And then between the platforms, there are openings that connect to courtyards. So you can actually connect down to all of the more busy functions underneath, where you have the meeting rooms and the restaurants and the cafes. And then finally, a solar canopy covers the entire sort of complex. So you can say the entire surface of the building is either glass or photovoltaics. So Larry Page liked to say that every photon that hits the building is somehow harvested. It's either used as daylight or it's turned into power. The canopy extends beyond, so that there's an inside-outside continuity. There's a total of 4 tents that we've been building over the last couple of years in collaboration with the Heatherwick Studio. And as you move inside, you have the sort of more buzzing places underneath. You have these kind of squares that then sort of lift and take you to the spaces above. And each platform essentially is then populated with a kind of human scale intervention that is more in the scale of furniture, so that each department can have its own identity and they can sort of expand and spread over time. The entire facade is as I mentioned, made out of photovoltaics. It's this kind of beautiful product where the glass is rippled like a sort of, almost like an egg crate in miniature, and it actually absorbs more light, so you don't see it as reflective, but that actually means that it absorbs more daylight and converts it into more power, but it also makes it beautiful as a material. So again, the architecture and the material choices, what in a way makes the building look elegant or beautiful, is also what makes it perform in terms of daylight and energy. Inside, you have this kind of vast catenary structure of these kind of sagging grid shells. A hanging curve is the most effective way to span for long spans. Also, for Google, when we had sort of developed these ideas for California, they asked us to take a look at their headquarters in London. And the building is essentially like, it's pretty much the size of the Shard, except it's a 300-meter long single structure with a sort of typical height of a London building. So in a way, what we were charged to do, it's wedged between the train tracks and the street in King's Cross. So we were somehow charged with trying to sort of reimagine all the principles that we have developed for California, and try to sort of see what would they turn into when you translate them to a sort of a London location. So in a way, we almost like turned the diagram of Silicon Valley upside down. So the building is extremely deep. It's at the deepest, it's 60 meters deep. So the challenge was to get daylight to all of the desks. And we came up with this kind of almost like an inverted pyramid, that all the support functions, instead of having them underneath, in this case, they are hung from the ceiling on 2 levels. So even though the building looks to be a 3-story building, it's actually a 10-story building. So you have like massively tall facades that allow the daylight to enter all the way into the middle of this sort of extremely deep floor plan. Then you have these sort of mezzanines hung from underneath. And then you have these kind of diagonal streets that penetrate from the street all the way to the top. So even though it is a 10, 12-story building, you actually have visual and physical connections from the street level all the way to the penthouse. And on the penthouse, you have all the social functions with this kind of park for the Googlers and for the visitors. So in many ways, taking a set of principles and values that had been sort of originated in a Californian context, and then translating all those principles to see what does it look like when it moves to London. Another sort of subject as part of this sort of series of oxymorons is, and I think maybe almost all the last projects somehow are in that category, is that you can say that the way we think about the world is almost governed by a general feeling of front of house and back of house. And the front of house is, the presentable part of the world. It's where architects design things, and it's where we try to make the world sort of nice and accommodating. And then you have the back of house, which is, our power plants or our parking garages, or the sort of warehouses or the industry areas where a lot of people work in their everyday, but somehow it's thought of as being not part of the presentable part of the world, so we don't put any attention into it. And to some extent, you can say a lot of stadium design is somewhere between front of house and back of house. And I think we've started sort of being more and more sort of interested in trying to put some energy into the back of house. The first one is a ballpark we're designing for the Oakland A's in Oakland, and the ballpark actually, like baseball, started as a sport in parks, and then at some point someone got the idea to put a fence around the field and charge a ticket, and that became the ballpark. So we got this idea of actually bringing the park back into the ballpark. The park is conceived as the central park of a new neighborhood in Oakland. So it's somehow like all of the streets of Oakland are brought out to the water and wrapped around the ballpark. Also because baseball is an asymmetric sport, it has an outfield. We can actually lower the bowl in front of it so that when you arrive to a game, you can actually walk across the stadium and straight onto the turf. And then you have this perimeter park that wraps around the whole stadium. And of course, on a game day, but you only have around 100 game days in a year. So on game days, it's part of the experience. The concessions, the restaurants, the clubhouse connects out to the park. And then also the seats that are the furthest away from the field actually have incredible views. Of course, the most challenged views of the game, but then they have the beauty that they're actually part of a park. So you can see this would be a game day, and this would be a normal day. So the other 250 days a year, this is simply the main park for the Oaklanders. So this is what a normal day would look like for an Oaklander, and this is on a game day. So instead of having the stadium being this kind of empty, white elephant in the middle of the city, it actually becomes like a lively, beating heart in the middle of a new neighborhood. So this kind of double thinking of both community park and ballpark in one of the same also, of course, allows us to activate this part of the town, but also gives us a sort of a reason to explore a different kind of architecture. And then of course, because we're in Italy, we've been spending the last couple of years working on two projects here in Milano, or more specifically out in San Pellegrino Terme, and it's essentially a factory for San Pellegrino, and we were asked to somehow imagine that the factory could also be combined with a kind of experience center, and we came with this idea to say that we would put the same amount of energy and attention into the back of house as we put into the front of house. So we clean up some existing buildings, and then we sort of create a new bridge, a new sort of garage for the trucks, and a sort of new extension of the factory in a sort of single gesture. So you can see this kind of very disciplined sort of industrial architecture of the existing factory is extended into the experience. And because we're dealing with very large spans in a kind of manufacturing scenario, we started playing with arches and how by scaling arches up and down, we could create a sort of controlled sort of a sequence of spaces. In a way, we thought of the architecture as the aquatic equivalent of a wine cellar. So where a wine cellar is sort of dark and moist and sort of humid, this would be sort of light and airy and full of daylight. And because of the kind of repetitive nature of the arches, once you look towards the valley and the mountains on either side of the Brembo River, the building is actually sort of entirely transparent. So here you see the sort of the arrival to the sort of the main sort of experience, and this is where both visitors and workers arrive. It's somehow like a grand foyer, but the back wall is actually a glass facade that looks straight out on the trucks that come and leave with the water. You then sort of ascend over the trucks, and the first sort of backdrop is a glance into the bottling and the manufacturing of the hall. So again, this idea that somehow the amount of care and the amount of presentability in all aspects of the work is dealt with the same amount of attention. And then as you sort of move along, you can see like this is the loading dock. So the arches actually help create these kind of extremely large spans. So sometimes it's almost difficult to understand the scale of the spaces, and this idea of a very repetitive, rational industrial architecture that ends up creating these very smooth sequences of space. The first part of the project is the design of a bridge across the Brembo, and then this truck parking. So in a way, because we had somehow started this sort of a sensibility of this kind of arched industrial architecture, it of course also works perfectly for the long span of the to get across the river. This is the construction site 2 days ago, and it has this kind of and of course each of the bridges have a name, and of course this bridge has the name San Pellegrino, Ponte San Pellegrino. And then essentially you start seeing sort of the architecture materializing, but because the first structure is a parking, it actually has no facade, it has no enclosure. It feels almost like some kind of Roman ruin nested in the valley, and of course like full of these framed views of the surrounding landscape. So if you have an interest in pursuing a career as a truck driver, I think this would be a pretty nice place to park your truck. Also yesterday we broke ground on our first project here in Milano at City Life. before the pandemic, we were invited to imagine. Of course, if you know city life, there's like these 3 existing towers by Isozaki and Libeskind and Zaha Hadid. And the brief was to add potentially 1 or 2 new towers to complete the master plan. And when we went on the first site visit, we took the metro train, and the metro is called Tre Torri. So we thought, and there is already 3 towers, so we thought it might create some unnecessary confusion if it's suddenly 4 or 5 towers. And we also thought our contribution was going to be the last and actually the shortest. So it felt like a competition we could not win. So we thought instead of competing with the 3 masters, we could sort of try to complete the ensemble by sort of imagining this new entrance where 2 buildings essentially, yes, you can say like in a way we allow the towers to rise above, and then below we create this kind of covered outdoor space. So we try to sort of organize the mass as low as possible, based on the European typology of a perimeter block rather than a tower. And then the 2 silhouettes are connected with a solar canopy that of course produces power. We believe it may be the largest urban integrated solar canopy in Europe. And of course between them, so rather than the architecture of the individual buildings, the space between them actually becomes this very generous new public space that it's shaded from the sun and sheltered from the rain. So here you see the kind of simple silhouette. And just like a sort of a classic portico, the canopy has columns, but they are incredibly thin columns because they're actually tension rods. Their function is to keep the canopy down rather than holding it up. The underside is dowel laminated veneer lumber, so it's essentially a massive sheet of timber, and the ceiling is entirely clad in photovoltaics. As you sort of move in from underneath the canopy, you can rise up to this kind of elevated terrace. You have the courtyards. You have the sort of the view into this kind of protected oasis in the middle of the city. And then, of course, you have underneath the sloping roof, you have a series of sort of really striking spaces that have sort of extra ceiling heights and abundance of outdoor space. This is this kind of destination rooftop bar with views over the surrounding neighborhood. And then each office level, all of the levels are actually connected to each other underneath the continuous diagonal of the roof, so that even if you are working in a company that is split over 5 or 6 levels, you can actually visually and physically connect to your colleagues in this sort of cascading space. So this is going to be the last piece of the puzzle. We broke ground yesterday and hope that it's going to be complete within 3 years. And then since we are at a design and furniture fair, a year and a half ago, we met this guy to the right, Jens Christian Vestre. He's a 34-year-old CEO of the furniture company Vestre. You may know some of their products. They're like a third-generation family-owned furniture company from Norway, and one of the amazing things about them is that they give lifetime guarantee on their products. So if you have a Vestre bench that is 30 years old and it breaks, they will come and fix it. He had a grand vision. He wanted to design the most sustainable factory in the world. So a very sort of brief was this idea from a factory from being dirty, it needs to be green. From being sort of hermetic and sealed off from the environment, it needs to be transparent and inviting, both for the workers to look out, but also for visitors to look in. He says, we don't mind industrial espionage. We welcome people to come here. And and essentially, like, rather than this kind of fenced off experience, to make it a welcoming environment. He believes that we will have succeeded if his factory is part of TripAdvisor when people travel to Norway. They're located right in the middle of the Swedish-Norwegian forest on the border between Norway and Sweden. And the program is incredibly simple, like basically 4 large manufacturing plants. We quite quickly came up with this idea of organizing them around a central distribution space, because you need to move things from one to the other at will. That also allows them to expand outwards in the future. So here you see the manufacturing space. He really had this vision for the people coming to work, that they were working in the middle of the forest. So this is the construction site as it stands now. The entire structure is made out of mass timber. So it is practically carbon negative from the starting point. Because you need to move between all the different wings, it has this kind of central distribution space in the middle. So the trucks can and the robots can move around this kind of central courtyard. This is what it looks like today. Then all of the management and the staff offices are located on the mezzanine above. Look with views out to the forest and into the plant. And then the structure, it is a factory and it is a kind of industrial architecture. So it is really the discipline and the rhythm of the large mass timber beams, the sort of exposed wood that really sort of defines the architecture. And as you can see on the photos, we managed to only cut down 3.5 meters more than the footprint of the building, which is the minimum space you need for a fire truck. So we literally kept the forest intact. The entire roof is either green or with photovoltaics. The green roof is actually transplanted from the meadows around the factory, so it's really just a locally sourced natural greenery, which also will make it blend in perfectly with the surroundings. The roof is actually accessible from a path, so if you do go to TripAdvisor and you do decide to come to visit this factory, the entire forest, we've laid it out with this kind of series of paths where we can also display some of the furniture that Vestra is doing. And as part of that path, you can actually sort of ascend and climb up on the roof of the building, look from those like kind of sloping sides, look into the factory. So this was one of our sort of illustrations, and this is the work in progress. So you really see the forest as this kind of incredible canvas right around you. And then sort of to remind ourselves that we actually, what they do is outdoor furniture for interaction and often playful elements. So we use the kind of color coding as a way to sort of cheer up the plant. So on the ground, you can see color-coded each of the different machines and work processes are connected to each other. So simply just by following the lines on the floor, you can sort of follow your way around the factory. The last element is this monkey path, that there is actually a wheelchair accessible ascent between the trees up to the main skylight, where you can sort of look into the factory. So the building sort of uses 90% less energy than a typical factory of its kind, and is on sunny days is fully capable of supplying all its energy to operate. The facade is of course also made out of timber, which is charred to withstand bugs and insects. So totally like this kind of example of just simply through the choice of materials and a sort of very conscious client, the sort of visual, aesthetic, and sort of environmental experience can really be sort of a next level. So this was just an example of how little footprint the building literally has, that it is simply like a piece of the forest that has turned into mass timber and now a factory. So that brings me to the two last projects that somehow takes this idea of form giving maybe one step up in scale. And the first one was that 2 years ago we met. I was invited to meet the president of Toyota. He's the great grandchild of the founder, so Akio Toyoda, and he told a story. He told me that up until the 20s, Toyota was a loom manufacturer creating gigantic looms for the textile industry. And then because they had capabilities of making very large complex machines, they started making motors, and they became the largest auto manufacturer in the world in terms of numbers. And he believed they also made the first sort of mass-produced hybrid car. They're like one of the world pioneers in fuel cell technology with hydrogen. And they're of course like expanding into iBots and mobility as a service. And he thought, like, just like my great grandfather pivoted from being a loom maker into being an automaker, I have to somehow go from being a car manufacturer into becoming a mobility company. So I need a place where I can test all of the technologies that are going to help shape our world in the future. Connectedness, fuel cell technology, electric mobility, driverless cars, assisted living through robotics, a Matternet that delivers the goods straight to your homes. So he had a site at the base of Mount Fuji where he was closing down 2 major factories because the production was moving elsewhere. And he invited us to sort of create a prototypical city where 5,000 people would work and 2,000 people would live. To sort of explore in a real inhabited laboratory the impact of changes in mobility. So you can say today the street has everything, but therefore also nothing everywhere, and almost all streets are dominated by cars. So we say maybe there's 3 kinds of streets: autonomous vehicles and pedestrians, more like a normal street, then a promenade where people can bike and walk, and then finally a park where people can walk. And then we weave these 3 kinds of streets together in both directions. So that means that you can walk from anywhere to anywhere in this city, moving only through a park, or bike from anywhere to anywhere, moving only along the promenade, or of course arrive anywhere with an electric vehicle. The roofs harvest power. We try to use renewable materials for the buildings. And then within this environment, Toyota and their partners can test and resolve all the most complex interactions between different forms of mobility. There's a Matternet that delivers the goods to the homes. You have domestic robots that sort of assist living. You have, of course, beautiful views of Mount Fuji. And I think what I find fascinating about the project is that we are commissioned by an automaker to make the city of the future. And as a result, we actually end up taking 2/3 of the space or the right-of-way that is normally surrendered to the car, and we give it up to more interesting forms of life, like including plant life and animal life. So we broke ground on the Woven City in January, and phase 1 is destined to open in 2 years. And the idea from Akio Toyoda is that the Woven City will never be complete. It's going to be this kind of continuous work in progress. And even if it's tailor-made, the idea is that the principles can be sort of extracted and applied to existing cities as diverse as Barcelona, New York, and Tokyo. So increasingly we had started sort of trying to apply, let's say, the power of form giving at larger and larger scales. And a year ago, we got a call from an American entrepreneur, Mark Lohr, who invited us to join him in rebooting capitalism and create one of the most admired cities in the world. That's definitely setting the bar. setting the bar high. And we had a conversation, and he told us about the economist Henry George that wrote a book called Progress and Poverty, an inquiry into the cause of industrial depressions and of increase of want with increase of wealth. And he was asking himself 100 years ago, why is it that as our cities and our sort of economies grow, that we keep having people that become poorer and poorer? And he concluded, in short, that the great cause of inequality in the distribution of wealth is inequality in the ownership of land. And he wasn't actually advocating communism, but the basic analysis is this, that you can say today when a city grows, and a city in the US is typically not much more than 100 years old. So someone a few generations ago owned a lot of fields, and suddenly, or like a few decades later, his heirs now own the land upon which the city has now grown, but it's not really their contribution that has increased the value of the land. It's the life and activity of everybody in the city that has increased the value of the land. So you have this kind of paradox that as the economy grows, land value goes up, and that actually makes equality go down, because to be able to afford to live there becomes more and more unattainable to the many. So he basically sort of invited us to think about how to do it differently, and he sort of introduced the idea of equitism, to found a city based on being the most open, the most fair, and the most inclusive city in the world. So open in terms of transparency and openness towards the public in terms of public spending. Fair, to actually give the people living in the city a stake in the increase of value that they help create by living and working there. And then inclusive, to actually ensure that you provide the basic opportunities for everybody. So in a very simple way, you can imagine the sort of opportunities of an American city with the kind of social security of a European or Scandinavian city. So he called this equitism. So the basic idea is that to create a private endowment that owns all of the land that the city will be built on, and then as the value goes up, that value is shared with the citizens, to have a sort of city charter with a mission and a vision, similar to when you actually try to found a company, and then of course to try to make it as sustainable in terms of urban design, both socially and environmentally. And then the basic principle is that as the city sort of takes off, the land becomes more and more valuable. That sort of increase in value is then reinvested into community services, such as free education, free healthcare, public transportation, and social security. So essentially what you pay over your tax bill in Scandinavia. And then we believe that we could be able to sort of flip this kind of counterbalance, so that as the city grows, it actually elevates the living standard for all of the city's citizens living in it. So you should think of Telosa, that the city is going to be called. It's a Greek word that means highest purpose. The idea is to imagine a city that has the sort of vibrancy and diversity of culture in New York, that has the sort of efficiency and safety and innovation of a city like Tokyo, and the sort of sustainability, governance, and social services of a city like Stockholm or Copenhagen. So we're looking at places in the US where land is inexpensive today, where we'll have access to freshwater sources, but also access to solar power, and are sort of beginning to take the first steps for a city that should have 50,000 inhabitants by 2030, and inshallah 5 million inhabitants by 2050. And of course, it's a pretty sort of aspirational goal for an architect and for a developer. But what fascinates me about it is a little bit back to this idea of the oxymoron, or the idea of the front of house and the back of house. That I think what you see today in the political environment and in the public debate is this sort of exacerbated polarization, where you are either completely on the left or you're completely on the right. And if you see yourself as being on the left, then you cannot even have a conversation of people who would self-identify as being on the right. And if you look at a normal distribution of almost any population, you typically see a bell curve, which shows that the majority of the population is actually somewhere in the middle. But right now it feels like you're either here or here. And what I like about an idea like this one is that it's actually trying to take, the market mechanism and use it as a vehicle to deliver the kind of social services and the sort of equality that you would normally find on a kind of more sort of socialist side. So I think as designers and form givers, we kind of have a responsibility to engage in these experiments and actually to explore ideas and solutions that are not necessarily found on either spectrum, but maybe like an oxymoron combines elements that normally would seem to be mutually exclusive, but when you really think about it, when you actually sort of combine these sort of seemingly mutually exclusive elements, some super interesting and super promising possibilities occur. I think we're close to getting kicked out, but maybe since we are here, if there's anyone who has a burning comment or question, we can have a little conversation.
So once again, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. I'm curious, your designs are marvelous as an architect, and how you can tell when it's enough? I mean, you know what I mean? You got me right. So it's hard to me, that's why I find this a problematic case by creating an idea or developing a project. And when it's enough? How you can tell that particular point?
I mean, you in the real world, you have a very powerful editing device, which is called your budget, and that I mean, of course, it would always be nice to be better resourced. And when you go through the sort of 10th round of value engineering, you are about to hang yourself. But there is something about that aspect of reality that it is a great editor when you have budget for half. Then you really put some hardcore sort of curatorial discrimination in place, and so I think in that sense reality is gonna help you with that one. But then I also think that in terms of design, in a kind of more abstract sense, there is something about I like to sort of explain, because I mean what I'm fascinated by is complexity, and I think the most beautiful definition of complexity that I found was in computer code. They talk about complexity as the capacity to transmit the maximum amount of information with the minimum amount of data. So the fewer keystrokes you need in order to make the computer perform a certain operation, the more complex the algorithm is. And you can say the fewer brush strokes you need to sort of convey a certain sensibility, or the fewer words, like an aphorism, you need to say in order to convey a certain observation or sensibility or meaning, the more complex. And I think the same is true in design, in form giving, that sometimes you can actually deliver more expression with less gesture.
More questions?
Hello, Bjarke. As I see in this presentation, I think you're like designing the future, like of the way we are living. We are going to live in the future. So I wanted to ask you, like, if you feel like the responsibility, like, what do you feel right now? Because I see that as Le Corbusier designed it once, like you are the new thinker of this generation. So what do you feel and how do you take this responsibility?
I mean, it's a how to answer that. I mean, I think I mean I had a conversation. I'm not sure if this is going to be an answer to your question, but maybe I had a conversation with Alejandro Aravena last night, and we had both sort of experienced similar things, but I was I had sort of a series of sort of episodes in 2020 that made me wonder if it was worth getting involved outside the kind of comfort of a more traditional role of an architect providing design services, and in my case, the first time I really sort of discovered this was that I went with a kind of a hotel group to the north of Brazil, and we went to visit some nature parks. And Brazil had, like, north of Brazil is the most biodiverse area in the world, and they're also one of the poorest areas in the world. So they struggle with this kind of slash and burn agriculture, where they burn down rainforest, and in 2 or 3 years later, that soil is now turning into a desert. But basically because they're starving, and then they were beginning to pursue tourism, but they were doing it in the kind of Benidorm way of, like, putting some big concrete high rises on the beach, in a way destroying the environment that was there. And we came, you know, with some of our references from Copenhagen and other places, and we sort of made a general statement to the Minister of Culture and Tourism that was hosting the kind of the visit, and we made this kind of very simple statement, but explained it with different examples, that in a way, that which would be the most ecologically sustainable would also prove to be the most economically sustainable. That they would actually generate more economic growth for the area if they would preserve and strengthen the habitat and protect the habitat as it is now, rather than doing what you did in the 60s and 70s in Spain and in many other places. So and after we made that presentation, we were going to leave the next day, but then in the morning they said we called the federal jet. We were going to fly you to Brasilia, and you should give this presentation to the president's office. And we thought, incredible, like that's why we're here. We're trying to have what we believe to be a positive impact. And we went, and we were given 15 minutes, and it ended up being 45 minutes. And I could really feel it was a big ensemble of people. And all of the advisors and the president also, like, were listening, and they were clearly listening, because, like, they extended the meeting twice. I felt that we were sort of really speaking to someone who needed to hear this, and they were listening. And then afterwards, the Minister of Tourism sort of said that we should have a photo and a huge photo where we were all standing. And then we left and we thought, okay, maybe there is a way to have an impact like this. And then the Minister of Tourism and Culture sort of posted the photo, and then some various blogs, including Design, cropped the photo to include just me and Bolsonaro, as if we were hanging out in his summer house. And then without any interest, even though the Minister of Tourism actually explained quite well what the meeting was about, all kinds of fantasies, including from Design, about that now I was working for Bolsonaro, who is a homophobic president and who wants to burn the Amazon rainforest. And if you're not used to, and I normally say as an architect, because we're designers. I mean, 10 years ago, I spoke at the World Economic Forum, and the only people in the audience were the wives, because it was architecture, and we're building a house, except Marisa Mayer was maybe the only like real sort of high-level executive, but she was also there because they were building a house. So we're used to, as architects and designers, to be in what you call the third section of the newspaper, because the first section is the grown-up stuff. It's like politics and economy, and then you go to sort of entertainment, and you find design there. So once you move into the first section, it can be quite uncomfortable because you've lived this kind of protected, cushioned life as a designer, and the only journalist who would have an interest in you is the feel-good journalist. And I was like, but it was super uncomfortable, and it was very difficult for anyone. I was wondering, like, do journalists not care about, or like, do they have no interest of leaving their readers better informed than before, or do they really just all want a click, no matter what the cost, even if it doesn't make the reader more informed, but you just distract them enough to claim the click and the eyeball time. So I asked myself if I should sort of refrain from doing that another time. Like, should I say no to the possibility of influencing the leader of a G7 country, or is it actually better to do it and to engage in the dialogue and try to have these engagement, even though, of course, it involves more risk, and you have to somehow really be clear about why you're doing it, and you have to be sort of you have to scrutinize your own motives and also your own methods, because of course the bigger responsibility you take, the more you have to stand up for it. And we had a few other incidents that made me think about it, but finally I do believe that I have spent the last 25 years learning a lot about complex issues, and I think we as a company, as a culture, like some of my partners are here, have been working together for, and Andreas, who's here, I've been working with him for 20 years. So the fact that we have created this assembly of different skill sets and talents, and that we've dealt with these projects and these collaborators, in a way obliges us to attempt, because I think we may be better equipped in terms of experience and in terms of our mindset and way of working than so many others. So ultimately, I sort of decided that we are doing this, and we will keep trying to get engaged in more and more complex projects, even if it. Yeah, exactly. You can clap at that. No, but even if it does involve sometimes ending up in the first section of the newspaper, and sometimes having what I felt and believe was uninformed journalists trying to make drama out of something that is maybe necessary if we wanna bring the world further. There's no power on your microphone, but I can. But the question was how do you manage your personal life, a woman architect and Mexican, asking a question, you know, and I think we all struggle with that. I became a dad almost 3 years ago, which has definitely made me discriminate a little bit more about how I spend my time, and I think. I think it's a work in progress, right? Because I think one of the things that I think when you know I was a kid, I imagined that at some point you would grow up, and then that was it. But the problem is that my feeling is that every 6 months, somehow your life and your work and your role is a little bit different than it was 6 months before, and the ways of doing it 6 months before that worked well then no longer work anymore. So I think it is this kind of constant reflection on how things are going and how things are working. And then I think the good news is in a way that I mean now I have 23 partners. I have 2 Italian partners. Lorenzo is maybe here somewhere. I think he's actually had to do some real work. And that means that as the work evolves, the roles that everybody take changes a bit. And I would also say for my own sake, because then people say, but are you ever sketching anymore? And it's true, like I don't click on a mouse ever. And in a way, like sort of, maybe this is the last part of the answer. I became an architect because I wanted to be a cartoonist. And I was, you know, in my childhood, I was drawing with ink and watercolors, so you could like, and crayons, so you had so much sensibility, and you could really you could put so much expression in the movement of the wrist and the wetness of the ink, etc. And then I started architecture school, and I had to draw with a hard line and with parallel rulers and all that stuff, and with the lettres set. I mean, it sounds ancient when you say this now, but of course you lost a lot of the control or the feeling you had, but you gained the ability to construct 3-point perspectives and the choice of thicknesses. You could really construct much more complex drawings. But then quite quickly I started drawing on the computer. And of course now I lost the touch and the tactile kind of control of it, but you could, so you had to like place points, but then you could apply materials, you could do light settings, and you could sort of move around in various kinds of ways. And so each time you lost some of the control you used to have, but you gained a whole new world of possibility. And I think I've simply graduated to the point where I now design with people. So through conversation and through exchange of sketches and ideas, other people than myself end up doing the designs and the work. But I still feel and I can see that I am deeply involved, even if I don't touch the actual design anymore. So I think it is this. Each time you give away some of the control you used to have, but you gain a whole new world of possibility. So maybe in the interest of time, this is maybe one last question, and then we do it. Is there a clean? I accidentally pointed the. Oh yeah.
Hello, I just want to say thank you for your lecture, for this great opportunity. And as we know, during these 2 years, there is a difficult situation with coronavirus. And my question is concerning this, how coronavirus and other viruses will influence on future of architecture. Thank you.
Yeah, like I think. I mean, just to be clear, like personally, as an architect, I'm a firm believer in the superiority of physical space, and I think I think if maybe just one part of the answer, and maybe that's the sim is if you look at the work environment. Of course, like after 2 weeks of working remote, we were all pretty excited at how well it was going, right? So we can work remote, and Twitter said we're never coming back to the office, and I think after a year and a half of working remote, I think we're all looking forward and enjoying the power of a physical space, and I think. I think the best sort of analog I can find is this idea that in education there was a similar or like an unrelated but somehow relevant shift. This guy, the founder of the Khan Academy, he was asked to help his nephews and nieces with math. So he started making YouTube videos. And he sent them to sort of go through and teach them to solve math problems. And he just left them open on YouTube. And one day he gets a phone call from a teacher who said, I love your videos. I'm using them in my class. Could you make some more, please? And that became the foundation of the Khan Academy. Because he was observing that you can say the classroom is a technology, essentially. It's a space that allows to disseminate knowledge from a teacher to a group of students. But now we have so many other technologies, and he was realizing that what was happening was that, so you go to class, the teacher has to go through the curriculum, so he's like, or he or she is speaking one way to the class, and then the students are sent home to do homework where they have to solve problems, but then, unless their parents actually know how to solve these problems, then they're sort of, they get stuck, and then they come back to class, and then now the teacher's there, but hey, we have to go through the curriculum for tomorrow. So you end up using, so then he flipped it. He said, go home and use videos like this that teach you the curriculum, and then there'll be little, little questions so that the teacher can see how far did you get in the video, but also to make sure you didn't fall asleep, or like sort of to make it somewhat interactive. And then you come to class. And then you sit in the class and you can work with your fellow students. You can ask the teacher. So you work in a much more multi-directional, taking advantage of the physical space to do those things. And I think similarly with work is that you can be pretty productive at home if you know what you're doing and no disturbance. But then why you go to work is to inspire and to be inspired, to exchange, to immerse yourself in a team and solve complex problems, and to sort of remember to tell this thing to that person that was working on this thing that you talked about the other day. So I think in the future, the good news is that I think actually there's still a huge demand for the work environment. It's just going to be more exciting and more stimulating and more varied spaces, because the lame sort of accommodation of desk space, you don't really need that, because you need the work environment for something different. And then you can still do like focused, concentrated work at home. So I'm pretty bullish on physical space as we go forward. And I think it's quite clear in some of the headquarters we're working on now for major creative agency in Los Angeles. They had this kind of thing. They say, okay, we have to compete with people's homes. And in LA, they have a house with a garden, so we need access to outdoor space. They also have access to their fridge, so we need much better food. And then they sort of, maybe we should have a physician, so if people start feeling a little bit funny, they don't have to book an appointment with a doctor and drive for hours. We can just check them very quickly and maybe send them home. So they started sort of using the pandemic as a way to really think about making the work environment a lot more accommodating and a lot more sort of exciting than it is today. Okay, thank you.